Welcome to another AGvisorPRO webinar for agriculture. The topic today, of course, is nitrogen, the future of nitrogen in Western Canada and the Genesis Nitrogen Fertilizer project. My name is Robert Saik, and I'm your host. I'm the CEO and founder of AGvisorPRO, and Genesis is a partner in AGvisorPRO with a community on AGvisorPRO. We encourage you guys to download the application on your iOS and Android and join the community. Today, we're going to address a number of questions. Why do farmers pay so much for nitrogen? What's going on in the nitrogen market globally? How will Genesis Fertilizers help complement the farmer's ability for supply and nitrogen and ultimately farm profits while reducing environmental footprint? That's a really important one. And why is this investment a sound investment for farmers and for Western Canada? And how can farmers participate with Genesis on AGvisorPRO in other ways? So, again, my name is Robert Saik. I'm the moderator. We have three guests with us. We have Terry Dubuque, who is the Vice President of Business Development with Genesis Fertilizer, longtime agricultural person, global experience. Really cool to have Terry with us. We have David Pupo. David is going to be working with us on what's going on the international side. He plays a role in corporate development and strategic partnerships. And then no stranger to Western Canada is Regis Karamanis. And I saw Regis in Olds, and I said, hey, I'm going to ask Regis if he'd join us on this webinar, because the guy just knows so much about fertilizer and farming, and great person to have to talk about nitrogen. So we're going to answer the questions, why, who, where, how, when, all around this project. We're going to talk about why this is a sound investment for farmers. I got very excited once I learned about the board of directors. I got very excited after looking at the Stantec and the MNP numbers about the potential profitability. And we always talk to farmers about having some off-farm investments. Well, nothing better than having a lucrative off-farm investment that's also tied into the production of something that's needed on the farm. Regis, we're going to turn it over to you to start off with. You and I have had a long career in agriculture following nitrogen. Tell me what's going on with farmers, their nitrogen utilization then and now. What are you seeing, Regis?
Well, what has happened over the years, Rob, and we were talking about it the other day, is that we have the development of so many new cultivars, and from some research that I done very recently, I found out that the last calibration of the fertilizer recommendations that was carried out in Western Canada was back in the 90s, and in the one in the early 2000s, 2001. So the moral of the story is that we do have new cultivars. If you look at the average yield of wheat, for example, back in the 90s, it was in the 28 to 30 bushel, Now we are talking about cultivars that have 70, 80 bushels yield. And there has been no really any research in calibrating and coming up with new recommendations. So the moral of the story is that we have new hybrids. They are much more efficient than the old hybrids. However, the yields, the average yields are double to 2.5 times greater than what they were 20 years ago. And we do not have any official guidelines, if you want to put it that way, that would guide us in terms of nitrogen. So we are not probably utilizing nitrogen as efficiently, as adequately as we could. So that's my take, Rob.
Yeah, we started off our careers, Regis, and 20 bushel. I remember a contest called Rape Yield 30, where 30 bushels was the target yield in that contest. Today, that would be a crop failure, and we push that limit with the canola 100. Of course, those new hybrids demand a lot more food, but I probably agree with you. They're probably doing it more efficiently as well. So there's a need for a new set of guidelines with respect to calibration of N. We'll come back to that in a second. David, we talk a lot about fertilizer and Canada being an exporter of agricultural crops. We are also an exporter of fertilizer, but a lot of that actually moves back and forth in the term trade. Could you tell us a little bit, because a lot of people would think that Canada is abundantly supplied with fertilizer, but in fact, a lot of fertilizer comes in from elsewhere. Could you paint that picture for us, David?
Yeah, so concentrating on urea is very much a global commodity. It's driven by geopolitical events. It's driven by logistics. It's driven by tenders out of India. It's driven by Chinese supply and their export policies. Those Chinese export policies very much influence the urea market. To give an example, they're completely shut down from exporting urea right now as we speak, because they'd like to keep that internally or domestically. To give you an idea of what's happened most recently, as in the last couple of days, that's impacted Canada in the last couple of days by about $10 to $20 per ton up, is on August 19th, India did a tender for, they awarded 1.17 million tons. And those 1.17 million tons still have not been bought by the traders who awarded the contract. On September 19th, they came out with very much a surprise Indian tender. That surprise Indian tender is expected to be for another 1.5 million tons. Now, the reason this is a surprise is because people believed that India was full of urea at around 6 million tons. It turns out their supplies are, or their inventory is below 5 million tons. So that moved prices up. That move in the price up has done a couple of things. It's made the world worried about global supplies, because the Middle East came out and said, well, to the traders, you're going to have to wait because we're completely sold out until October. So now we have this situation in India where the traders who were allotted or awarded some supply to give to India on August 19th are now seeing higher prices while they're trying to buy that supply in a previous tender. The new tender has gone up in price, and that's impacted the rest of the world, including Canada, which is very interesting because we do manufacture urea in Western Canada. So Western Canada is an interesting place because they use that term export. I'm not a big fan of that term because what you see is there's trading around positions. So we have these manufacturers right here. There's a massive one in Saskatchewan, but they trade around the positions to the tune of, in 2023, we manufactured about 4.4 million metric tons, and we delivered 3.9 million metric tons to agriculture. So that's the supply and the demand side. Canada uses slightly different terms when it goes into StatsCan. They call it deliveries to agriculture. But the actual trade between Canada and the U.S. was roughly 600,000 tons. So 623,000 tons were imported into Canada from the U.S., but then Canada sold 559,000 tons right back to the U.S. So it's almost a net even position with these guys trading around, again, their positions. So it's a price game. Wherever I can get the best price is where I'm going to go. I don't care. And that's a little bit sad, if you will, for Canadian farmers because they're paying the highest price for urea in the world.
Okay, so you open that. I wanted to go there now. So how is price established? No, that's perfect. How is price established, David, for the Western Canadian farmer? I mean, we sit on abundant natural gas. We sit on abundant land base. We sit in a highly consumptive area. So how do we establish that end price that eventually farmers pay for urea?
It's import parity minus, meaning our Canadian price is based off of imports coming into New Orleans and then freight from New Orleans up the Mississippi into Western Canada. So it gets all the way to the top of the Mississippi. All those touch points generate a cost. For example, every time you touch a barge, it's going to be anywhere between $8 and $11 per ton for loading and discharging. So as that money or cost adds up, it gets Canadian retailers to a price. So right now, my favorite analysis is the metric ton conversion, Canadian dollar converted price per metric ton, and the spread between Canada and NOLA. Right now, it's about $175, which is where it should be. Meaning at today's offer prices from a few points in Canada that I checked out yesterday, it's $660 or $670 per metric ton. It's probably where it should be, which is expensive. But it's based on that NOLA to Western Canada freight number.
Now, how much of the fertilizer that we get in Western Canada actually goes through this price discovery process? In other words, actually, how much starts in NOLA, New Orleans, and moves up the Mississippi to actually give us that price, or is it primarily calculated?
It's primarily calculated, and then the U.S. is usually short these days, close to 6 million metric tons of, 6 million short tons of urea in the U.S. We're about even in Canada, maybe a little bit long, but our consumption is growing quite aggressively. And then the numbers tell us that about 560,000 tons make it up into Canada. So
right.
from the
Okay,
U.S.
So this sets the stage nicely. Regis talked about the advancements in cultivars and yields and nitrogen utilization by farmers. You, David, talked to us about a nitrogen supply in Western Canada, largely self-sufficient. Some trade back and forth, but the price discovery system is NOLA plus the touch points. The last manufacturing plant in Western Canada that was constructed is almost 30 years old, and then that leads itself to the idea that perhaps it's time for us to have another production facility in Western Canada to help meet the needs of these future farmers, especially since Canada is one of the few regions in the world that has export capacity to help feed the planet. Terry, talk to us about why Genesis Fertilizer. What's the thought process behind it? And then we'll get into more of the details about the Genesis Fertilizer product. But let's start off with the why. We'll get to the farmer's role in the project here in a little bit.
Well, as you know, and probably everyone on this call, fertilizer is one of the highest costs at the farm gate. And David talked about the price discovery of how they established the price to farmers out of NOLA and adding freight and touch points up to Western Canada. But another important price discovery mechanism is natural gas. And natural gas in Western Canada is actually priced out of AECO. It's the Alberta government decades ago created a company called AECO, the Alberta Energy Company, and everyone in Western Canada prices their natural gas off of AECO. Eastern Canada and the United States, they price their gas off of Henry Hub in New York. And Henry Hub sells their gas in British thermal units in US dollars. AECO sells their gas in gigajoules in Canadian dollars. So the plants in Western Canada are actually manufacturing at the lowest cost because natural gas is one of the major inputs into making nitrogen fertilizer, and they're selling at the highest price. So their netbacks are extremely large. And one of the reasons that we started this plant was to take that profit and give it back to those investors who invest in the fertilizer plant.
Let's just slow down a second here. The price that we could acquire the nitrogen, the natural gas to make the nitrogen is amongst the lowest in the world. All right. And because of the pricing mechanism that David talked about, we pay amongst the highest price in the world for urea.
Exactly.
Oh, seems to be some room there.
There is. And as you know, actually the plant that's at Belle Plaine that was built by Cargill in the Saskatchewan government back in the 1990s, it's owned by Yara today. It's over 30 years old, and that's the newest plant that is in Western Canada. For the most part, and David might be able to add to the companies that are publicly traded, but Yara is owned by the Norwegians, and the Koch brothers in Brandon, Manitoba are privately owned by Americans, and then Nutrien and CF are publicly traded. But for the most part, the profit exits the country.
So we have a situation here where we see an opportunity. So the crop yields are growing. The demand for nitrogen is not going to be abated. The pricing model seems to be distorted against the benefit of the farmer. You've got this opportunity in Saskatchewan to build this plant. Why Belle Plaine? Like, why that particular area, Terry?
Well, these projects are really these mega projects, because this is a big project. They're broken down into two components: inside battery limits and outside battery limits. Well, the inside battery limits are basically the reformers and the guts of the plant, all the stuff that goes into building the plant. And the outside battery limits are things like road, rail, water, power, gas, access to labor. And Belle Plaine is situated where all those outside battery limits are located. And that's our site itself is got natural gas pumping stations all around it. We've got mega power. We're on Dudney Avenue, which is a super grid. We're 4 miles from the Trans-Canada Highway and right off the Kalium Road. We've got the largest water pipelines in the province run through that area. We've got both rail lines, the CN and CP. So we do have all the outside battery limits that are required to build this type of project.
How many acres out there in the Belle Plaine area
that we own?
Yeah.
So Genesis Fertilizers owns 296 acres, which is ample amount of room. Back when SASFRCO or Yara was built in the 90s, the footprint was much larger than it is today because of new technologies, new metal that they use, and that's less corrosive, and the footprint's just smaller.
Back to you, Regis. So as we stare into the future and you look at all of the macro numbers, you see all the environmental constraints being put on farmers in the European Union and other places. Canada still, and I'll stand to be corrected on this, Canadian farmers are still highly and efficient. In other words, from a world scope, we're pretty good at N efficiency, and we have more room to do things. And yet we're going to need to use more nitrogen to hit more yield so that we can participate in the export opportunity that we see in front of us. Talk to us a little bit about what you see as the opportunities. We're good at what we do. We can do more. We can do better. What's in your mind in terms of how farmers are going to be using nitrogen in the future, and what opportunities do we have?
Well, do you mean in connection to the environmental concerns?
Yeah, that two sides. The ability to use more nitrogen, because I think we need to as we...
Yes. And
the second one is the environmental concerns, our ability to use it as efficiently as possible, Regis.
Well, yes, and that's, I spent a good part of my career looking at the enhanced efficiency products and how they contribute to the reduction in the gas emissions, Rob. And also what really got me, and I did quite a bit of research when I found out that Genesis is considering to produce urea ammonium sulfate.
Yep, urea ammonium sulfate.
Ammonium sulfate, because there are some benefits to using ammonium sulfate in terms of gas emissions, from the point of view that ammonium sulfate, and there are products now in China, for example, they use ammonium sulfate as a coating, but other products around the world. But nevertheless, what happens with ammonium sulfate is this when you apply urea, what happens is urea is converted to ammonium. And when that conversion takes place, it releases water and hydroxide, increases the pH of the soil, and we have volatilization losses. When you drop the pH, and that can happen in the presence of ammonium sulfate, that can reduce the volatilization losses. So I can see a benefit from the environmental point of view of including ammonium sulfate. Now, somebody can argue this is not as effective as the stabilizers. However, there is enough work out there to show that, it can be fairly effective. So I can see, how that, Rob, can help us improve, increase the use efficiency, and at the same time, do not impact the environment as much.
We're going to talk about that impact of the environment. So there's impact in the environment at the farm level. Urea ammonium sulfate, great product. It has got excellent stability characteristics. You can, of course, take urea, add urease inhibitors, nitrification inhibitors, increase stability with that product. The urea itself, if you could make the urea itself in a more environmentally sound manner, we'll come to you in a second, Terry. But first, David, from a global perspective, from the manufacturer standpoint, how much under the microscope is nitrogen fertilizer being looked at from the global environmental perspective? And then we're going to turn back to why Genesis, again, makes a lot of sense.
There is a microscope on both ends, and it's from the manufacturing point of view that Terry might be able to chip in. But what we're seeing on the retail point of view is before it gets there, the retailer is demanding I don't know if you want to call it a better product, but it's what Regis just discussed. It's a product that is coated with something that allows it to sit in the soil for a little bit longer and do a better job in the soil. So we're seeing that demand from between the manufacturer and the retailer to have something that's already done before it gets here. So, I'm involved with a company that has a shed that's full of spraying equipment that we're getting some demand to say, hey, can you spray this for us before it gets to either the farmer or the retailer? So the microscope is on both ends, and it's getting pretty intense.
Well, when you're looking at the overall impact of greenhouse gases in some sort of a flow, you have to look at scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. So we're going to, have Genesis put up a nitrogen fertilizer plant in Western Canada. What makes that nitrogen fertilizer plant special, besides producing potentially urea ammonium sulfate? There's a big deal. And one of the questions that came in said, how are the government programs going to impact the production of nitrogen fertilizer with the Genesis project? And I'm lobbing this ball to you, Terry, right now, because there's some really good news coming out of the Genesis camp on this very issue.
Yes. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, that's a long answer. So first of all, I'll start with a couple of weeks ago, and this has been in the works for well over a year. We signed an agreement with Carbon Co. And Carbon Co. is a carbon sequestration company. And so not only is it the right thing to do, it also allows us to, people perk up when it's a green plant. So we're looking at a low carbon footprint, which—
Hey, Terry, just stop. Explain to me what the heck a carbon sequestering company is. Like, what is Carbon Co.?
Yeah, so what Carbon Co. does is they basically take the carbon, they scrub it, they take out all the bad product, and then they inject it into the ground. And I'm told that Saskatchewan is one of the best places in the world to sequester carbon because it actually goes into the ground like a long ways down and it becomes part of the earth. and it's not that readily available in other parts of the world. So we just luckily, by our location, is that there's a proposed carbon trunk going in, actually right at the south end of our land. So Carbon Co. would then scrub the carbon and inject it into Whitecap is the company that's actually got the go ahead to build the carbon trunk. It would go into the Whitecap carbon trunk, and we would be a low carbon footprint company. So
this is fairly serendipitous. You just happen to have a chunk of land, and it just so happens that this carbon trunk line is going to move through that south end of this chunk of land. And that, what does that mean then to the manufacturing facility that you're putting up? I mean, I'm assuming we're working with Haber-Bosch process, but what's the net result of being able to scrub that carbon and push it into Carbon Co. and ultimately sequester it? What does that do for the urea?
Well, in terms of the urea, not much, but what it does really do is that it makes our plant probably one of the only ones in the world that doesn't release carbon into the air. And so and going back to your original question, the government has come out with incentives to do low carbon footprint urea plants. And so there's Bill C-59 and Bill C-69 that PwC and our engineers are looking at as we speak. And if you didn't know, we signed an agreement with PricewaterhouseCoopers a while back to do our debt and equity financing, and the incentives are actually really substantial. So we have to look at them. And like I said earlier, it's the right thing to do. Not only should we do it, it attracts a lot of interest from the debt community and the equity community, and I'm sure David could talk on that better than I could.
Regis, if you think about the production that has to happen in Western Canada, the fact that our target yields will go up, and that we want to mitigate greenhouse gases as much as we can, are you confident that the Western Canadian farmer can do so? And are you confident that in conjunction with projects like Genesis Fertilizer, the future is good for us?
Well, I believe so. And I believe that, one of the things that we have to understand, Rob, is that the Canadian farmer, the Western Canadian farmer in particular, is very effective in using and applying fertilizer. Mm-hmm. Deep banding, let's talk about, deep banding that reduces emissions dramatically was developed here. And it's, you look now with people putting the fertilizer, I don't know, they're talking about 65% of people putting the fertilizer with at seeding time, whether side dress, side band, maybe the percentage is higher, that reduces the emissions considerably. So from an environmental point of view, I think we're on the right track,
David, go ahead.
And I believe that, as I mentioned, with the introduction of new cultivars with higher yields, and more higher demand for nitrogen, I think that more nitrogen production will be appropriate and will contribute here to increasing yields without, the environmental concern that a lot of people have, because I think we're doing things, not everybody, but the majority of people are doing things right.
David, if you take that two ends of that story and bookend that, what Regis is saying is that Western Canadian farmers have got a history of using nitrogen efficiently. I would concur with that. I think our nitrogen use efficiency is easily above 70% in Western Canada, maybe higher. That doesn't mean we don't have room to grow, but we can. If you bookend that side of the story, David, with potentially what Genesis Fertilizer could do with carbon sequestration and creating a green nitrogen, what does that do to the story of Canada, David? and crop production here internationally?
Well, what I'm seeing on the banking side is, so I come from that industry. I came here to Saskatoon from New York 8 years ago from investment banking as a fertilizer trader in the commodity world. So I had regular daily communication with all the big players in fertilizer globally. And what I'm seeing on the banking side, still being in contact pretty much every day, is that green or more environmentally friendly part of the story is becoming very important, with even the involvement in banks in these types of projects. So they want to hear that almost right at the top of the list. Mm-hmm. And what it does for Western Canada is make it much more attractive than, say, any other project. Now, the other interesting thing about that any other project is we're not seeing them. What we are seeing is a little bit of M&A activity going on. There was a big facility that just got purchased or acquired in the U.S. And then on the other side of that, we're seeing expansion projects in urea, but those expansion products to have that green bend or that environmentally friendly bend. So if you're going to expand your urea capacity, we got to make sure it's clean. And that lends very well to this project in Western Canada. Once again, there are no new projects going up, and that will enable Genesis to really utilize that supply quite effectively.
When Terry, when you came and approached me to come on with AGvisorPRO, we set up a community for you in AGvisorPRO. I began to do some diligence on Genesis because, like most people listening right now, they don't know much really. They have some preconceived notions of the project, but I spent some time getting to know the people that were leading. Like, we've thrown around some names now. We've thrown in some, can you hear me, guys? Am I good? Yep. And we've thrown some names around like PricewaterhouseCoopers and Stantec and M&P, and people have crunched the numbers. But really leading the project, I spent, I guess a couple of weeks ago, a couple hours with Jason Mann, CEO, trying to learn more and more about that. And then what really shook me, or what really gave me a lot of confidence, Terry, was the board of directors. Can you talk a little bit about the who's involved in this project and how they came together? Because there's a lot of depth in this project.
Yeah, so we have 3 independent board members. One is Garth White, and Garth used to be the president of Fertilizer Canada. He's been around the world in the fertilizer sector and industry. He brings a really good governance and due diligence and auditing perspective to the board. We have Kathy Jordison, who joined our board, and she was a former vice president with Yara. She looked after Yara North America, but was really focused on the Belle Plaine facility. She was instrumental in getting the expansion that took place at the Belle Plaine facility, and she's got an enormous, not only financing of these types of projects, but operationally, she knows how they operate, understands transportation, basically the whole fertilizer sector in North America. Then Ian Craven joined our board, and Ian was a partner at M&P, and he brings obviously a wealth of information in terms of finance, and he's been involved in this project really from day one, so he knows it well, understands the ag community, and just a great resource on our board. We did acquire one guy in particular. His name's Mark Smith, and Mark was the CFO for Nutrien North America, and he's got a chemical background. Really knows the industry inside and out, and usually when Mark talks, and he's kind of he's a drill sergeant, so he constantly has tasks and to-do lists. So he's one of our great leaders. And then we went out and hired, not on the board, but we went out and hired a team of engineers who just commissioned a nitrogen plant, a ThyssenKrupp Stamy carbon nitrogen plant in Brunei. And the leader there, Renato, He's actually built 8 urea plants around the world. So we've got a really good, experienced engineering team.
Wow. So that's impressive. You got to get all that pulled together. And then let's switch a little bit into the money side of the equation. Now, PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC coming on, they're going to be leading the investment banking. Are you talking potentially a $2 billion project here? But the idea of the Genesis Fertilizer project would be that it was first farmer-owned. And so if my numbers are correct from the diligence that I did, the indication is about 30% equity and 70% debt. I don't know if I have the numbers right. Correct me. And that 30% equity could actually come from farmers who can invest. And that's what Genesis wants, is farmers to invest in the fertilizer plant. We encourage farmers to have off-farm investment to diversify their portfolio. But this one, not only a lucrative potential off-farm investment, but one that will come back and benefit the farm itself. So can you talk about the aspiration of Genesis to have farmers as the 30% equity side of the equation and how unique that is?
It's actually very unique. And I'll start with the offtake. So the offtake basically means that the people who invest in the plant, for the most part, want the fertilizer. So they're the people who own the plant take the fertilizers. And that's critically important for banks, because basically the product's sold before it's even manufactured. And it's also good for the producer, the farmer, because they're guaranteed a supply of fertilizer. They're entitled to that fertilizer, and Genesis Fertilizers has to make sure that they get it. So that's probably the biggest or the most unique part of this project.
So farmers are going to be the first equity partners in, and the word offtake means basically pull. The farmers are basically going to pull that supply back because they have an interest in doing so, and they need the product. And the product is green urea, so it meets that check mark of environmental. It helps, I guess, with the environmental side.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we have the offtake, so that's critically important. And then you have the sequestration.
Yeah.
And then you have the nitrogen supply.
Well, including the UAS that Regis was talking about. And that product there is actually imported into Canada now. And Yara makes it in Europe, and it comes in, and 100% of all the product that comes into Canada is sold. So it would be unique to actually manufacture that product right here on the prairies.
Yeah, we'll loop back to you in a second, but Regis, just another commentary on urea ammonium sulfate, and I have worked with that product, and it is a good product. Just a little commentary on it.
Well, I did some research. Actually, it's published in the scientific literature, and what I did is I compared that product to actually physical blends of urea and ammonium sulfate, and it performed equally well. So that's if that's what you're after.
Would you be excited to have a source of urea ammonium sulfate for farmers in Western Canada?
Well, there is, like I said, from a performance point of view, it's the same thing as having a blend. The advantage is that from a volumetric point of view, now you don't have to have as much, from an operational point of view, and sometimes, we have to take the operational point of view into account. A farmer that uses a blend has to stop more times to fill up his tank compared to a person that has this product. So there is an operational advantage. So when you have, when from an agronomic point of view, you have a good product, so yeah, by all means.
David, you got involved in the project. I'll turn back to Terry in a second. I didn't script you with this question, but why? Why did you get involved with the Genesis Fertilizer project?
So it's actually one of the reasons I came here from New York. Largely because of the financial structure makes a lot of sense to me. So it's extremely important. One of the things I was involved with back at the bank was that particular bank wanted to be involved in financing a urea plant, both on the equity and debt side. And the first thing that a commodity bank looks at is there an offtake agreement? This offtake agreement goes even further in going direct to the user. So it's not going to a trader. It's not going to a seller. It's going straight to the end user, which to me, in a financial perspective, makes the financeability of the project much stronger. And that was the largest part. The second largest part was urea globally is growing at 4%. These plants get announced by everybody you can imagine in the world, but very few of them get built. And that 4% on the demand side is going to be outstripping the supply side before we know it, especially in Western Canada. We're pretty close to that point now. So especially Saskatchewan, which only has one plant, is going to see that demand outstrip the supply. So it's required, and they're always long-term projects because they're so big. So by the time they get there, there's going to be more demand or higher demand than supply.
So, Terry, you're on the ground actually at the kitchen table with farmers talking about the Genesis Fertilizer project, the Genesis Fertilizer investment. How does this all come together for a farmer? And what is the, it's not going to happen overnight. There's a horizon on this. It's going to take some time for it to happen. You talked a little bit about the carbon bills that the government has right now, C-5969, I think you said, and they're going in through additional due diligence, slowing down the process a little bit, in fact. You talk a little bit about that window, that horizon, and that involvement for farmers?
Well, sure. I mean, ultimately, we want farmers to own this, and I told you the major reason is that it's good money back to farmers, and in that profit stays in the country, and it guarantees a supply, and it makes the project more bankable financially. However, like our illustrious CFO says, Mark Smith, he says, we're not building half a plant. So we need to get out and get as many farmers as possible in this project. But at the same time, we're dealing with, I think we counted the other day, 30-some companies on this project, and lots of those companies want offtake. So our first preference is for farmers, but we're not building half of a plant. So there'll be a window where farmers are able to get involved. And right now, what we're doing is that we go out, we determine with the producer how many tons that he wants to commit to. They put down 15% of the investment, and that's what we would call risk capital. And then they wouldn't put down the other 85% of their investment until we actually are putting shovel in the ground, and it's called FID. It's called Final Investment Decision. So it's a pretty good project. There's a guy that works with M&P who basically tells his financial advisors that we're not asking for a lot of money. It's not even their annual fertilizer bill that we're looking at, and we're truly only looking for 1,400, 1,500 farmers to get involved. It's not a big number.
Well, I know some of the farmers that have invested. I've talked to them because I was trying to get a reading on all this stuff, and they said the same thing. A good investment for the farm, but also something that benefits the farm in Western Canada. I'm looking at a question that just came in here: the status of nitrous oxide reduction goals in Canada. Reduction by what year? I have a background in actually the carbon offset business. Back in Agritrend's day, we had a company, Agritrend Aggregation, and so we played in the area of reduction with reduced tillage protocol. But you've got three greenhouse gases. You've got carbon dioxide. You've got methane, which is about 28 times more greenhouse gassing than carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide, which is 311 or more than 300 times more greenhouse gassing than carbon dioxide. So the extent, back to you, Regis, the extent that farmers can reduce nitrous oxide, lots of controversy when the government came out and said that farmers needed to reduce their nitrous oxide by 30% in Canada And a lot of press got out there that was an absolute reduction of 30% of fertilizer, which is crazy. We would never do that. That would be that would just hamper, handcuff production of produce with farmers in Western Canada. But the reduction of nitrous oxide is kind of in everybody's best interest. Little comment on that from the boots in the field level, Regis, and then back to you again, Terry, on nitrous oxide reduction from the fertilizer plant standpoint. Regis?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, we are following some practices, to reduce the nitrous oxide emissions. And what I find is people forget a couple of things. First of all, in our neck of the woods, with soils having 4 or 5% organic matter, there's a lot of N2O that we have no control over because it's a natural production, So that is one thing. Then the other thing that concerns me, and I've shared it with a number of entities, is how the N2O is being measured, especially in our environment where we ban fertilizer. Because, I mentioned a few times that if you see ban 10-inch, spread, distance between rows, 100 pounds. If you were to put on the whole field what you put in those bands, you'll have to put 60,000 pounds. Now, people that measure sometimes N2O emissions go and put their chambers on top of the, those bands, and what you get is a heck of a lot greater than what, But don't take me wrong, I do not argue with the fact that there is N2O emissions and we need to reduce. However, it's not as, I don't know the whole thing in the whole world, but we are not as bad as we think we are, to be honest with you. That's my view,
I'm hoping that the Canadian Senate study on soil as a national treasure will unveil the fact that Canadian farmers are actually pretty damn good compared to the global farmers. Terry, on the global on the Genesis Fertilizer larger picture front, I know this goes back to C5969, but what is your take on our ability to produce the fertilizer out of the project with lower nitrous oxide emissions?
Well, we're on the path to do that. So regardless of what we decide on the final basis of design, we will have a low carbon footprint. And I'm really not the guy to talk about the numbers, like the question from the audience, but I do know that every plant in North America is what they call a gray ammonia nitrogen plant. And we build this one, it'll be the very first green nitrogen plant in North America.
So that's substantial. That's going to be a check. That checks a big box. A question has come in, and this is a good question, because I don't know the answer to this question. Is it safe to assume that a mega retailer wants to step up and buy as much as they can of the end product, which would block the ability of Joe Farmer to buy fertilizer direct? It is, Terry, is that part of the plan, fertilizer direct, or are you going to make a percentage of that end product direct to farm? I mean, it may be early to answer that question, but at least philosophically, what is the desire of the leadership at Genesis on the distribution side?
It's the whole model and is based on 75% owned by producers. We've left like Western Canadian farmers to take the offtake. The 25% could go to an offtaker that's wanting the product outside of Western Canada. However, we are in our plan is to build 6 more what we call super centers or distribution facilities. And all those distribution facilities will service the investors of Genesis Fertilizers, but they'll also sell outside the investment pool as well. So we need a sleeve in order to service that market.
That's interesting as an agronomist and watching the evolution of precision agriculture and variable rate fertilizer in particular. We've gone, and in my career, we built fertilizer plants, fertilizer blending plants, and we spent a lot of money building fertilizer blending plants to bring together materials in a specific way based on the soil test analysis. And today, a lot of that blending is done on rubber. You have an air seeder out there that has multiple compartments, and you load those compartments up and load in the variable rate map. And as that product or as that machine moves along the land, the amount of nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, sulfur, etc., is varied in real time to the tanks as it passes across the field. So this has changed a lot, not for everybody, but for a lot of farmers, it's changed from needing to have blends and running back and forth to town for individual blends as you move across the fields or the crops to having straight product on the farm. So again, this kind of aligns itself with a lot of that thinking. And so I think we answered that question pretty good. David, back over to you. Looking at the international side of the equation, I don't think a lot of the Genesis fertilizer is projected to be exported. Is there a net difference to Canada with the Genesis fertilizer project? Are we going to export more fertilizer, or are we just simply going to meet our own demand requirements?
Terry's got the exact numbers. We will not take that much market share out of Western Canada, if I'm correct, Terry. There will be potentially some of that exported. It would likely go into the northern U.S., in my opinion. I could be wrong. Terry could correct me. So on a net basis, by the time they get this built, and when I say by the time it gets built, I'm not talking about delays or anything. I'm talking about the fact that building this mega project takes a lot of time. Canada will need that product, and Northern Plains will probably need some of that product also. So on a net basis, we're not impacting the market in a large way. I mean, if I could add to that, what we're seeing right now, in my opinion, is extremely interesting because, again, it's that where's the best price? Well, the Middle East is sold out, and they have told traders, don't come to us until October. They're also looking at Brazil as being a better price than NOLA. So NOLA is looking at the import market and saying, well, it's quite difficult to get product out of the Middle East. Now, there is also what's called the contract market. There are traders that go out and contract from the Middle East and constantly bring those vessels in. But those vessels are only just meeting the import that is required in the U.S. and sometimes not meeting it. That pushes the price up in the U.S. And again, that impacts Western Canada.
When you look at the production numbers out of this plant, I just had some cursory glances at the numbers that Stantec MNP generated. Like you produce urea for $150 a ton, easy enough, and then selling it for $550, $650, $750, $1,000. There's some margin there, and Canadian farmers are paying a lot of money based on that NOLA price. One of the questions just came in here. Has Genesis reached FID yet? If not, what is the timeline for FID and the major constraint? I don't know what that FID means, Terry. Do you know what it means?
Yeah, sure. FID is a final investment decision, which means we've got all the equity and money to move forward on the project, and that also includes environmentals done and the banks are on board and we're ready to put shovel in the ground. So no, FID is we have not reached that. We still have a year to do that. And so this next 6 months, 8 months that are coming up are critical for us to, move towards that. And that's a big part of what PwC will be doing to help us out as well.
So PwC is there to help on the investment side, but you guys have got a whole bunch of people that are on the ground talking to farmers. Again, I want to encourage farmers to download AGvisorPRO on your iOS or Android device. It connects you to agriculture, and inside there you'll find all sorts of communities. There are public and private communities. There are communities on drones and precision agriculture, and there's conversations around regenerative agriculture, and Genesis Fertilizer has been good enough to set up a profile of their company on AGvisorPRO, as well as a community. So you can join that nitrogen community, keep updated on what's going on, and keep updated in the conversation. So as we wind this thing up, we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to open it up to you guys to share some thoughts before I close. Regis, you've had a long career in this business. Ran into you at Olds at the Ag Smart show. I said, "Are you still involved?" He said, "Damn right, so I'm still very good and involved in doing what I'm doing." But I shared with you a lot about the Genesis project that you didn't realize. So how do you feel about what you've been learning about this project, Regis?
Well, I think it's something that can really contribute to the fertilizer, uses in Western Canada. That's really nice. I think so that both short and long term, I think it can contribute. And the fact that there is the so-called great, component of it, it's really positive for the future.
Yeah, certainly that whole story about how it's being produced and then how we could utilize it and do better things with it in Western Canada bodes well for the Western Canadian brand. Speaking of that Western Canadian brand, or that Canadian brand, David, what's your thoughts on it? I mean, you were excited enough to move to this project. So your thoughts?
Once upon a time, geopolitical events in the commodity markets used to happen every years. These events seem to be happening way more often, in my opinion. And I say seem to because I don't have the data in front of me, but those geopolitical events which impact the commodity markets create this volatility, and that volatility is sometimes quite aggressive. So, to give you an example, in September of 2022, farmers were paying $1,100 for urea. They're paying $670 today. And what worries me today is that China can either stay shut or they could open the spigots. India could either continue to do these tenders, which put the brakes on any downtrend in price, or they could stop importing at any point, which is not going to happen. That volatility affects these Canadian farmers when it should not really. So this type of product is risk reducing for the Canadian farmers because it essentially removes that volatility from the largest aspect of their income statement. So it's something they don't have to worry about once the project is built. They don't have to say, what are fertilizer prices going to do and how is it going to impact us?
Mm-hmm. I mean, to pick up on that, Russia attacks Ukraine. Urea is moving into the St. Lawrence Seaway. Canadian government decides to declare a $15 a ton tariff on that fertilizer. The farmers in Eastern Canada have nothing to do with this, but all of a sudden they are nailed with an additional $15 a ton that I don't know where that money went to. Did it go back to helping Ukraine? I'm not sure. But those geopolitical things do happen. This potentially could create more stability for Canada. And I think that being fertilizer sovereign is a really good thing. We are fertilizer sovereign in potash. And if we could be fertilizer sovereign in nitrogen, that would be good. And developing some phosphate somewhere on the Canadian Shield would be great as well. Terry, wrap it up for us.
Sure. Just a couple of things, Rob. We had a guy by the name of Josh Linville from StoneX Capital talk about fertilizer at the crop production show in Saskatoon. And he had told the audience and at the time that Canada is going to be short over 800,000 tons by the year 2028. This plant doesn't quite cover that. So in terms of going back to the percentage of the market that we're going to take, by 2028, we will just be servicing the market that's required right now. I think what I'd like to end with is impress upon the people the leaders who I've looked at the attendees, and there are some investors that are on there, and I call them leaders, to impress upon them that this is a big project. and the due diligence that we have on this project is paramount. Access Capital is actually the company who raises the money. They're an exempt market dealer that is audited and they're registered with securities in every province that we deal with, and producers write a check to Access Capital and Trust. That's what they do. We're dealing with technology providers that are global, whether it be ThyssenKrupp in Germany, or some of our Korean partners like Carbon Co in Korea, and our urea synthesis, Stami Carbon in the Netherlands, to all the utilities in the crown corporations that we have with this government. We're dealing with the feds and the provincial governments, and not just, when I say the provincial governments, it's not just the government, it's the Ministry of Energy, it's the Ministry of the Environment and Transportation, the Economic Development, and then the banks, whether it be PwC handling that, but we're still involved with all the banks and the crown corporations like FCC and EDC and BDC and so on and so forth. And then the railways, CN and CP, it's just a lot. The gas supplying companies, and then all the utilities like Sask Power, Transgas, Sask Energy, and so on and so forth. So it's just and then the environmentalists. Yes, we have 5 excellent engineers on our team, but we still need environmental engineers. We still need our EPCs and construction firms that we've actually pretty much solidified. We just haven't made the announcements on who those people will be. And then just accounting. KPMG is our auditing firm that does our books, and MNP is our modeling group, and you'd already mentioned Stantec. So it's just, I think we sat back and we said, I don't think people really realize all the touch points that we have on this project. And I think Mark Smith, our CFO, would say we're doing this pretty lean. We're being pretty prudent with the money that we raise, and we're going to do everything we can in our power to get this project off the ground.
Well, I think that's a great way of summing it up, because it does lead to the size, the scope of the project, as well as the number of firms and people involved, and the benefits for Western Canada are there. Farmers can invest. They get a hold of you on AGvisorPRO, Terry. They can get a hold of Genesis Fertilizer on your website, and I'm encouraging farmers to do so. If you have any questions, just throw them into the community conversation on AGvisorPRO. Thanks for being with us on another AGvisorPRO webinar. We will be repurposing this as a podcast and as shorter video and audio clips for use and consumption later on. Thanks a lot, Terry and David and Regis. It was great to have all you here. Thank you very much, everybody.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks.